And we are live with another episode of the Headphone Show live stream. And today we're going to do a Q&A session with Tyler, who's frantically unboxing stuff, and our new addition here to the review team, Chrono, who doesn't have a webcam set up right now, but will in the future, I'm sure, or something, maybe a camera. We can figure that out. But in any case, welcome everybody to the live stream. Good to see everybody in the chat as we get more unboxing ASMR from Tyler. Ooh, is that a topping? Topping
D90.
Wait, was that the one? Was that through us?
Jeremy.
Oh, okay. I was like, I was supposed to get that one.
No D90 for you.
Yeah.
I pirated it.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, let us know for audio levels, but on my end, it looks pretty good. I'm tone it down a little bit so we prevent some clipping.
Holy, Martin's in the chat. Hello from your vacation, my man.
Hey, Martin. Hey, Sheldon.
Sheldon, yeah.
Yeah.
A bunch of other folks.
David's in there. Which ZMF cans are you sporting today? Well, I'm using my usual ZMF opens. I don't have any other ZMF cans at the moment. Cans. I don't know if we should move away from the term cans.
I like
should we keep it?
It's ridiculous, but
well, I know there's Can Jam, right? Like that's it still fits for Can Jam. Exactly, right?
To me, cans invokes that childhood wonder of having literally the can and the string, you know?
Yeah.
You talk and yeah.
Did you ever try that? Does that actually work?
I've never tried it. Well, I think I've tried it, but I've never actually got that to work.
Yeah, I mean, how much of it is just your proximity, and how much of it is? I mean, but it technically it is producing sound vibrations. And
if you use a Kimber cable between the two cans, it'll work. But that's the requirement. But yeah, I was gonna say, replying to Kev, I did used to own an Auteur for a long time, which I loved, and that's still one of my preferred sound signatures.
I think my favorite for ZMF.
Well, of course, it's your purple one.
The purple one, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta love that Celier stand as well. What's the wood on that? Is that leopard wood?
Yeah, it's the leopard wood one.
Yeah.
And then
it looks really cool.
I have a couple of the Celiers with the I'm blanking on the name of the wood, but it's the one with the different colors.
Right. I think I like the leopard wood one the best, though. I like that consistent look.
It looks really good with these. For whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason.
Oh, the Stelia?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a similar color almost. Yeah, it's kind of like a
aesthetic,
as they say, cognac and mocha.
Yeah,
Oh wow, yeah, no kidding.
Oh, that
Dude,
looks really nice. They match actually very closely.
And I like the cable as well. Yeah.
That beautiful purple cable to contact.
Yeah.
I put purple on everything.
Yeah. I saw a good question in here for us. Between the Verite and the Arya, which is more brighter? And I think that's a fairly straightforward answer, as the Arya is more brighter, so it's more treble focused. But it depends also on the Verite, on which pads you're using for the Verite, because the Verite's tuning can, let's say the Verite open in this case, because I don't have the closed, because the Verite's tuning can change depending on the pads that you use. But in general, the Verite has a more warm tilt there, especially in the upper mids, like between 3 and 4K hertz, whereas the Arya is a little more elevated in that region specifically. Like it's even a little more north of the 2018 Harmon Target. In that range. So the Arya is definitely more brighter, more, let's say, upper mids and treble focused. But it's not out of balance. Like it's not bright in the sense of peaky. And this is another question for both of you guys, I think. Do you think that it's possible for headphones to be brighter or warmer and still retain tonal balance? Or does the fact that a headphone is brighter or warmer indicate that there's something out of balance with it? And to give an example, a Bayer Dynamic isn't necessarily like the DT1990 Pro. I wouldn't say that's a bright headphone, but a lot of people, myself included, are annoyed by that 8.5K hertz peak, which makes it sound kind of like treble murder in a way. So I'll let you you guys answer that.
I wouldn't say that it's bright, see, because using the DT1980 Pro as an example, like it actually has a very good frequency response for the most part. It's actually balanced in general. You have a good transition between the bass and the from the mids to the highs as well. It's just that then there's that one peak.
Yeah.
So it makes it seem bright, but it's really just that it's peaky.
Yeah.
In contrast, something like the Aeon 2, which is what I'm wearing right now, but you can't see it, is that it has a wider elevation. So I think that would be categorically bright, but
yeah.
I wouldn't call it peaky.
What do you think, Tyler?
I mean, yeah, I guess that's. I mean, yeah, I'm not the best with the measurements, so it's hard for me to kind of pull that together. But I'm trying to think. So the basic question is if what's peaky and or what's based on Harmon curve or
no so I first came across this, well, not first, but this was demonstrated to me by the Audio-Technica ADX 5000 or ATH ADX 5000, where it's a headphone that's bright. It's definitely more counterclockwise tilted for the measurements, but the way you hear it as well is way more treble focused, but the treble on that was actually relatively smoother than the HD 800. Didn't have the crazy peak there at 6K. So is it possible for a headphone to be bright and then consequently also a headphone to be warm, but still retain good tonal balance?
That's tough. I think it's a tough one because at the same time, I guess it also depends on what your definition or one's definition of bright.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But say even bright to you, right? Say something, because I know you like more of the warmer stuff, but say something is bright to you. Do you think it's possible for that brightness to still be a balanced brightness, or is that, definitely. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think so. Because if you think about this Focal lineup, right? I would almost consider those somewhat brighter on some levels, right? The clear, but not in a bad way. It's a nicer sound, but
the Ananda is the one I'm thinking of.
Oh, yeah, actually that's fair. Yeah, I would. So I actually still have that with me. So, this is definitely bright to me, and has a more sharp, sharpness to it. Trying to think of the word I'm thinking of, but it does have that. It also depends on what your definition of warm is. It warm as slam, or is warm like a
right.
CMF is warm, whereas the mids are warm.
And that's another good question. Actually, it's another good point, because for a lot of people, I think, warm indicates bass elevation and bass presence. But to me, warm has never been that. To me, warm has been where you have an upper mid, recession. It's more lower mid focused, right? That to me is more kind of the warm sound.
I'm in the similar feelings as to that too. To me, warm is more that ZMF mids warmth, right? Where then lows to me are slam. You know what I mean? That's it's that oomph that really gets you that, the visceral feeling is the lows to me. That's when I think of the speed of even the Verite closed or Verites. They have good slam, or especially some of the Planar magnetics too. They have really good slam, but I wouldn't consider them warm.
Yeah, for me it's only the high end planars that or the Odyssey. The Odyssey planars have slam usually, except for the GX.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
For at least for me, warmth comes from usually it has a cool down upper mid range, kind of like the GX.
Yeah.
And maybe a slightly clockwise tilted sort of treble, like the GX. I think I would call that warm because for me, the Ananda and GX are actually very similar in their overall balance. But of course, the Ananda is more counterclockwise tilted, so it's brighter relative to the GX. But their overall balance is very similar. I actually find the treble on both of them to be very smooth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the GX is smoother of the two, but overall.
Have either of you guys tried the? Well, I guess I don't think Chrono has, but have you tried the Arya yet, Tyler?
I haven't tried the Arya yet.
Oh, okay. because that was the original question, is which is brighter, and I think it's a very straightforward answer on that one, because I don't think that the Verites are particularly bright. I think they're, I mean, again, depending on the pads, some of the pads they're fairly balanced, but other pads you could use, they're quite a bit warmer. And again, as Tyler said, it depends on what your definition of warm is.
Yeah. That's the tough. That's why it's like sometimes I get kind of like, well, I don't want to, because my definition is not necessarily the same as like a lot of other, because I agree with you. I think sometimes a lot of people can not confuse, but like a lot of people consider low end warmth like it's a base base like a Cascade. The campfire out of Cascade would be a warm.
Oh god, yeah.
But to me, that's more like a base
insanity. Yeah,
like it's more, so like I wouldn't call it warm. It would just be a bassy headphone.
Yeah. So moving on here, last rhino asks, so why did you sell the Auteur if it was one of your preferred sound signatures? That's a good question. The main reason was because at the time I had the Auteur, and I also had I had two Planars. One was the Aeon, original Aeon, and then, so not the 2, and then I also had the LCD 2, and I ended up selling both of those as well. But there was one thing about the Auteur there was one thing that those did that the Auteur didn't do, and then I got the Verite in. And the Verite did that thing, and it was the speed. I was kind of missing that planar, the tightness, the control, the overall sense of immediacy for the attack. And I found that the Auteur, while it was fine in that department, it wasn't as good as on the LCD2, and it wasn't as good as on the Aeon. And then I got the Verite in, and then I realized that the Verite was just as good as those planars that I liked, and better than the Auteur, and then it still had the slam from the Auteur, from the dynamic driver. So I ended up just selling those other headphones as well. Right? I figured, I would take a EQ'd Verite over an Auteur just because of its technical benefits. Moving on here. Here's a good question for you guys. Question is, which headphone manufacturer has the best wood? And we know that that's ZMF for sure, but apart from ZMF, which headphone manufacturer has the best wood? Let me just sort of modify this question a little bit. Apart from ZMF, which headphone manufacturer has the coolest looking cup design?
I'd say outside of wood.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, it could be wood, because like there's wood cups on Denon, there's wood cups on the Meze 99 Classic, right? So just in general, like cup design, it could include wood, but like, I think obviously we know your preference is ZMF. Yeah.
If we're sticking to wood, I'd say ZMF, then probably the Fostex or Denon stuff, or the Lawton.
Right, the Lawton one. Yeah, I forgot about that
mods. It's not really a headphone company, but he does do specifically cups.
Right. So there's also the EMU stuff as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And those have some decent. And actually, they actually do. You can actually order separately. It's I think a couple of people in the different Discords have been ordering them separately. The EMU cups specifically to try to put on Fostex or other stuff, because I think some of them work with that.
Right.
And
I've seen now you can buy the cups separately, the wood pieces there.
Mm-hmm. And they're pretty nice looking. But I would say, for my order of business, would probably be I'd go ZMF, Lawton, because they're just so custom into that. Like that's their
right.
Thing, And then the Fostex Denon, and then probably EMU. And then let's throw it out. Let's throw. I think Grado does wood cups, right? So,
oh yeah, and they do. Yeah, that's right. Cups, right? Yeah. I know Chrono's not into the wood aesthetic, in spite of the fact that there's an imminent Verite closed on the horizon.
Actually, if I it's not my style, but I find something like is it Rawson audio? Rad Zero, like it's
the Rad Zero.
Yeah, but
I like wood.
But like we said, different audio. Different
exactly.
Cups, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. It's kind of like a cool, very artsy kind of aesthetic. I dig it. But just to continue with the whole I'm a Odyssey fanboy thing, I really like the Odyssey design. I feel like they have a good balance. They have the wood, which is a very natural sort of element, and then they have the rest, which is like a very industrial design. I feel like it has a very good balance between those two themes. And I really like the actual rings, the wooden rings. They have a very nice grain to them on the Odyssey. And the lacquer they use reminds me a lot of the kind of stuff that they use on electric guitars. So
I was going to mention the Odyssey, like the ring lacquer and the wood design that they have for some of them. But have you seen Chrono physically at LCD4?
No, unfortunately not.
No. In person, those look like the wood on those look awesome. Like they're not like other like normal wood cups.
A bit of polish for
Yeah. It's really refined. And I gotta say, the other one that I think might get overlooked for how it looks, like the visual style, is actually the original AudioQuest Night Owl, because that was actually wood as well. Like the cup was they called it a liquid wood, and so it was this some sort of like wooden material that they used for that one. And as much as like, okay, say what you want about how the headphone sounds, with a very like, very warm, dark headphone, bassy headphone. I love the way that those look. I mean, and they're not only are they really comfortable, but the design aesthetic is fantastic on those, on both the closed and the open. And I think, I was going to mention the other really good looking, I was going to mention the other, what I don't like for wood in headphones. What I hate is the Hi-Fi Man wooden veneer on the HE1000 SE and on all those like high-end Hi-Fi Man headphones. I wish they were all just that one metal piece and not have that wooden veneer thing, because that does not look good.
It's like somehow like the 70s, like
god,
popping. It's like something they put like a fake veneer on like a 70s cup of some sort.
Yeah.
Actually, two more actually that I wanted to mention. I had to agree. I think I really like the design of focals. Like I remember the first time I saw them, I was like, wow, they look like they could be French. Alas, they were.
Yes.
It's just very nice. Too bad they don't actually fit on my head. You can't see it on my videos because there's nobody else for reference. But I think I have a fairly large head, so even if I extend them all the way, they pull slightly up on the bottom side of my ears. And then there's also Marcello's Aeolus. That is a look.
Oh yeah.
That one specifically. That's just.
I saw some of those designs at Can Jam, I think, as well, where they had that sort of unique looking wood design for the Aeolus. It looked fantastic in person.
The new stabilizers are pretty fantastic.
Yeah, they're crazy as well.
But my top two actual looking headphones, as far as companies go, would be ZMF and Focal. Those are my top two.
Oh, big surprise there.
And Elric is in the chat. What's up, buddy?
No, I tend to agree with Tyler though. Like those are my, because like that's one of the things that I think headphone companies, like the high end headphone companies, are. Oh, did my camera die? You can still hear me, right?
I can still hear you. We can still hear you.
I don't know why that happened. And I'm back. Hey, look at that.
It hasn't hit YouTube yet, so you're good.
Oh yeah. Oh, it might be because the battery ran out, even though it's plugged in. Something weird's going on there. But in any case, what was I talking about? High-end headphone companies haven't really figured out how to make stuff look not ridiculous, right? Yeah. Some have, like Focal. They are the most, let's say classy looking, I think.
Lifestyle looking, right?
Yeah, maybe not this Stellia, because that's a bit intense, but I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the.
I'm not a fan of the brownie.
Yeah, but like the Allegiant. Okay, my camera is just dying here.
Like, so I think these are fantastic. Okay, I'm joking. I can't.
That could have come out of Star Wars, and man, the SR1A. It looks interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
I consider it the F1 styling, right? Like F1 racing styling. So
yeah.
It's all about function and I don't know.
But
and you
honestly,
have one right now resolved, so.
I do, yeah. But honestly, even the Hi-Fi Man stuff, like, pull the Arya out here. Even this, like, as much as I like. Oh, okay, my camera's just not working right now. We only have Tyler. I think I know what the problem is, but yeah, even the Hi-Fi Man stuff is. I think as much as they've refined the look quite a bit, I really do think that it looks a bit gaudy in terms of how huge the cups are and all that stuff. So they still haven't figured out how to make, headphones look extra regular.
Actually, the Sangara looks quite nice, but I just feel like the some of the colorways that these companies choose, like I don't really like the chrome plate with the super dark wood on the LCD4, then with carbon fiber. I don't feel like that's a very cohesive looking design.
No, I tend to agree.
For which one? Sorry, I missed that.
The LCD4 where it has like super dark wood, chrome, and then also carbon fiber. I don't think that's like a very.
When you try to mix modern with like kind of like, what would you call that? Like a wood aesthetic. Like I think it's really hard to pull that off. Like
Yeah,
I tend to agree. Sorry, I'll let Tyler pull a question from the chat there. I'm just fixing my camera here.
See here. Oh, yeah, Empyreans. So here's, and I don't think you've heard it, right, Chrono? I think Resolve has, but like the Empyrean looks super, super good, super comfortable. Elnick just got one, and they are one of the most comfortable headphones I've put on my head. One of the best. Like, they're pretty massive though. They actually do stick out pretty far with their cups and the pads. Sorry, specifically the pads. But I'm not the biggest fan of the sound. Like I couldn't get past the sound signature of those. So
yeah. I just think they weren't quite as appropriate for the price, but we did. Yeah.
They look very nice though. They just look huge.
Yeah.
They're big.
I got this. I know I hype the Sandara a lot, and it is one of my favorite headphones. But I do like the look of it.
I like the grill. Yeah, the grill's cool.
Yeah. So I guess like that's one of the things I'm looking for always, like with headphone aesthetic design. Is like, what's something that like looks classy and professional, and as much as like the ZMF stuff looks kind of like the we know it's sort of like that heirloom style. It's not something that
you don't walk around with it.
Right?
Yeah. I would prefer something that's more low key, not particularly provocative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I honestly think the best headphone for that kind of thing, for look wise, and even a lot of people dislike the sound of them, but like for the price and performance, like honestly, and aesthetics. Like I don't feel super bad for taking these out anywhere. I don't feel super
weird
about
perfect work headphone.
Oh yeah, And they, I've had these for a year now, actually. Plus, I think over a year. But and I wore them. I wore these probably when I had for these have gotten hundreds of hours probably, and never changed the pads, and they still look fantastic. So,
they're a little big, but I don't think the Aeon would look super bad if it was like a dark metallic gray instead of red for going
Completely
outside.
Completely agree. That's a huge missed opportunity. The candy cane red, I don't know what's going on with that, man. Like, I like the blue look better.
Yeah, I feel like that was more subtle at least. It doesn't look bad. It doesn't look bad, but I feel like I would definitely prefer matte black.
Matte black for everything. Actually, these. Okay, so I just got in the
portable
Moondrop KXXX. Now this is the drop version of the KXXS, and look at this. I don't know if you guys can see it, but
I'll have to wait for it to hit the YouTubes.
Yeah, and camera's not focusing on it because it's locked onto my face. There we go.
Hide the face.
Yeah, but it's matte. It's basically a matte black Starfield, which.
Awesome.
Okay, so apparently the sound is okay. This is interesting because apparently the sound is just like a KXXS, so like the slightly higher end version of the Starfield. But when I measured this, it measured exactly like a Starfield, like perfectly matched to the frequency response of the Starfield. So I kind of,
I like the look of it.
I love the look of it. But like the thing is, I think this is if it is in fact the KXXS. And it measures the same as a Starfield. I think this is a fascinating experiment as far as like what the differences are for materials, because apparently there is a difference in the diaphragm material. And so if they measure exactly the same and there is a sonic difference, then we got to figure out what what causes the sonic difference, right?
The color.
It's just the matte black that does that. I mean, we've talked about this with purple, right?
Purple makes everything.
I know I've been talking about matte black everything, but I kind of like the look of the Starfield. It's just
the original, yeah.
Yeah, it's just very nice.
Very nice indeed. I did see a question that I wanted to answer earlier on, and it was about. Sorry, it was about measurements. Maybe I'll have to hunt it down.
We need a color grading.
Would be fantastic.
Measurements.
What's that, sorry?
I said Yaxi pads. Someone mentions Yaxi pads for Stellia, and I was like, that would bring down the cost a bit. Especially
would that even work?
They'd have to make custom ones because they do. Yaxi does HD 600 series.
Oh, okay.
Pads. They do the pads now for the Grados. They do obviously the cost stuff, and I think they have a couple other ones that they do. But yeah, I'm always been impressed with what Yaxi does as far as like pads go.
You get like some super orange pads for the super orange pads for the Stellia. Yeah,
I was actually joking with you. Like, I honestly, I might even over the next year, but I'm thinking about if these get pretty chunked up, because these that's the other thing about the Stellias. I don't know if anybody else is. They have the kind of like the Campfire Audio Andromedas or the Campfire Audio line. How like just even a little tiny little like they get little. They call it the patina for Campfire, but like these get that they have because they're painted, so or anodized or whatnot, and so there's part of me that wants to go once they get pretty chunked up is to go and take them all apart and then sandblast the pieces and paint it purple because of reasons.
Of course. I mean, no, because we know that's how you get better sound quality. No, I think someone asked about the measurement reliability at around 8K hertz, or the something. Okay, yeah, it was that there's potential for a peak to show up at 8K hertz that doesn't show up on measurement, or a peak to be there at 8K hertz that doesn't show up there on measurements because measurements aren't reliable above 8K hertz. And this is something that like I actually think is not the case, because if there's a peak there, even on the less reliable mini DSP ears rigs, it'll show it. Like if there's a significant peak, like say like the one of the Bayer Dynamics or something, that'll show up on rigs that we know are less precise even than the Gross stuff. But when they say that these Gross measurement rigs like the 43AG, when it's said that it's reliable up to 8K hertz, that doesn't mean that there isn't information to be gained from the region above 8K hertz. It's just that it's not as reliable as the regions below it. So if there is a significant peak there, you would see it. It's just that you wouldn't know if it's like exactly at like 8.5K hertz or 8K hertz or whatever, or like 8.1K hertz, right? Or something like that. It would be potentially off by like a little bit. And that also, the reason why that I tend to think that doesn't matter as much is because the positioning on the rig causes so much variability anyways, that any imprecision that exists above 8K hertz would show up or would be superseded by the positioning and varying and position variance regardless. So I don't think it's as big of a deal. The bigger question in my mind is there are a number of dips that show up above 8K hertz that are supposed to be there, or there's at least one dip, right? But usually it's around 9K hertz, but sometimes it's like at 8K, sometimes it's at 10K. And that's due to let me just get the ear out here. This is the model ear.
Oh, that's not an apricot, damn it.
No, this is actually Evander Holyfield's ear. No, I'm just kidding. But if you look on the inside of this part here, right, that's the concha, and that can there's headphones frequency response can have interactions with that part of the ear and actually impede certain frequencies. So you don't want to EQ that up, even though it doesn't match the target. There's a dip there. So there's headphones that measure with this weird dip at around like 9K hertz, but on these rigs, but it's supposed to be there. And the problem is that the target curves just don't reflect that. And unfortunately, they can't reflect that because it's not in the same place for every headphone. It could be in a different place, right? But I'll give you an example of a headphone where this doesn't show up. The dip doesn't show up, and it should show up. And it's actually the DMS Diana Phi that we have here somewhere. Oh, it's behind me. Yeah, here it is. So with this one, it's not that there's no dip. There's a little dip, but the dip isn't significant enough. And what that means, right around 9K hertz, and what that means for the DMS Diana Phi or Abyss Diana Phi with DMS mod is that it causes this weird shimmering quality to occur. And there's two places for that, but one of them is the 9K hertz lack of a dip. And if you guys want to know more about this, there's a FAQ for Oratory's measurements that he does on his subreddit. So I encourage you to check that out if you want to know more about why the 9K hertz dip should be there. But basically, when you see that, don't EQ it because that can ruin the frequency response. Yeah, it can ruin the way your headphone sounds. And I remember I was doing my EQ profiles before, and I was doing it relative to the measurements. I was like, why does this sound so weird? And I realized it's because I was trying to EQ something that was supposed to be there. So I hope that answers your question in a long-winded way.
That's actually an interesting thing too. It's like sometimes I think you talked about it before the factoring, and Chrono can jump into or chime in on your thoughts on this. But like sometimes the tuning might be tuned a specific way that's enjoyable to the engineers or the people that made the headphone, right? But it might not actually fit that Harmon curve, or it might just not look right?
Right.
So how much of that can be played into how one would look at a headphone, like how, and then like you said, and then if someone were to come in and go, okay, this doesn't look right, let me adjust it to Harmon or adjust it to what my preference curve is, and then it completely goes to crap, or like
yeah. Well, I think I'll let Chrono jump in here in a sec, but I think with that it's you have to, it's what you were saying in that one thread when we're talking about measurements and stuff like that, which Mad Economist was very helpful in providing a ton of information. Like, wow, there are books written in that thread about this stuff. But I think it's just like what you and Anthony were saying, is that you really have to understand the measurement rig to if you're going to scrutinize the measurements, if you're going to try and evaluate based on measurements. Like, first of all, I don't think that's possible. You have to use it as in conjunction with your subjective evaluations. But if you are looking at the measurements and you're trying to do an analysis of this, you have to understand the measurement rig to a certain degree. You have to understand where different things, like for example that 9K hertz dip is, or for example you should know whether or not they're using an RA402, especially for IEMs, right? That's a big difference whether you're using RA402 or if you're using the older 0045 standard. So and I actually want to have Kryn on the podcast again and talk to him about this, because we've been going back and forth on which one is better. Gross seems to think that the RA402, when I'm talking about RA402, that is literally the ear
coupler, right?
Exactly. I'll unscrew it here. But it's literally the ear sim. And this is the RA402 right here. It looks very small, but this is what goes onto the plate for the measurement system. The difference ends up being that if you're using this, it's apparently more readable in the treble. The information is a little bit more usable and readable in the treble, but at the same time, it does dampen. You do notice like the dampening right around like 8K hertz. And the question is, well, which one is correct? And to my ear, especially when evaluating, because I've been recently going back and forth with the Starfield and the KXXX, which is a completely missed opportunity for a name. To my ear, actually, the RA402, like where the damping is there, it does actually sound like that. It sounds like the way that the curve measures. And so for that reason, I'm currently on the train that the RA402, like Gross is right when they say that it's the current normal. But in any case, to get back to the question that you had there about, engineers tuning things to their own personal preference versus trying to match a curve, I think in general it's probably a good idea if they want to sell headphones, if they want their headphones to sound good to the widest range of people, they should probably use some version of the Harmon Target and then try and get it relatively close to that. But that doesn't mean that they should match it perfectly. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't take their own preference into consideration as well. And also, there's probably going to be, this is me. I'm not an engineer, so I can't. I'm not the person who's the authority on this. But from evaluating a number of headphones that don't perfectly match these targets, there are potentially very good reasons why they don't, and it has to do likely with the rest of the technicalities of the headphone. Maybe so for example, I know a lot of people were talking about the Campfire Era and how it has that 2.5 kHz dip, and in my mind that's something that if you want a wide spacious soundstage, that would make a certain amount of sense, right? So there's probably other considerations that are going into this that aren't just, I want it to perfectly match this consumer preference target curve. And so I think for us, when we are looking at the measurements and we're trying to evaluate this stuff and analyze it, we really can't be looking at this as any sort of perfect representation of how it's going to sound, other than the general indicator of, okay, we can get a general sense of what this is going to be like. And so I think, it's probably a good idea if they do try and basic things like making sure that there's an appropriate elevation at the primary ear resonance at around 1 kHz, and then going up into 3 and 4 kHz, and then coming down again at 9 kHz. So there's the general kind of this is a good idea, but to make sure that it matches the target curve perfectly, I don't know if that's necessarily a requirement for getting it to sound good. And so for that long-winded answer, I'll pass it over to Chrono. What do you think? I mean, you got the AKG K371 right there, right? Which is fairly close to the Harmon Target.
Yeah, it's very close. I think that when I think of the headphones that I listen to, right, I find that most of them do seem to follow an overall similar sort of shape for their actual curve. I mean, I don't have any equipment to measure it, but comparing my listening to, I always check several different measurements online as well, is that they all tend to follow a similar curve, and they just have these different characteristics, like a dip here or an elevation there, and for the most part they do sound good. I would say that, at least to me, the Harmon, closer to Harmon to me sounds more natural. I think that most people, if you put on a 650, right, 6 on somebody's head, I think that they would be like, yeah, this is natural or correct.
But on that subject, is a 6XX Harmon, because it's not in the bass, right?
No, it's not. But at least for the mid-range and the high, it's somewhat similar.
But that's I mean, one of the big questions for Harmon versus something like a more traditional diffuse field target. Again, I shouldn't say diffuse field, because there are ones that are ridiculous in the treble. It looks like maybe a DT880, or even a DT880 is too warm for a diffuse field target. But the idea of your ear imparting certain gain factors and your brain expecting to hear those gain factors, that only is really important above 1 kHz or above 900 hertz. Whereas all the rest of the different gain factors, there's nothing in the bass, right, that amplifies those frequencies. It's just a preference shelf that's the reason why that shelf exists. And for speakers, it's not the case, because there's also your torso and your the angle and all the rest of that stuff that may influence bass response. But for headphones, because they're already coupled to your head, there are no gain factors below 900 hertz, at least as far as I can tell. So it would make sense that the 650 and the 6, all of those line, it would, apart from if you just ignore the bass, they do follow the Harmon elevation relatively closely. But sorry, I'll let you continue.
Well, I was going to say, I'm actually not, when it comes to the tonality part, I obviously I talk about frequency response when I make a review, but I'm not very scientific about it at all. And I just think, if I'm listening, I have certain tracks that I feel like I'm very familiar with, and they have instruments that I've experienced, in real life for extended periods of time, things like guitars, drums, because I've played in bands before, so I think I have an idea of what these things sound like. So I'm like, I feel like everything falls within a certain tolerance of what it would sound like to me in real life. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's an important. We've talked about this in the past, but like, having that as a frame of reference. I know Tyler's got, he's grown up with a lot of
like
music.
music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something else we were talking about that in the thread too. I think Elner could. The threads we're discussing, like what's someone's baseline, right? So someone that's never heard live music before, what's right to them, right? It's kind of like that. Until you hear it, how do you know? Or like how what's and then will that live music sound off to them? Like is that now like, oh, that doesn't sound right? Like you know what I mean? So there's also an aspect of it that when you get into like the psychology of it more, so the just the way the brain works, and which actually kind of leads into another question I was gonna kind of ask, if you guys don't mind, which is kind of an interesting one that was kind of brought up in some other of those kind of measurement stuff, was like, so the Harmon curve, when you actually look at what it is, it's an averaging of a set of people, right? Like so there's outliers,
consumer preference,
consumer preference, but it's still an averaging of a group of people, right? And so when you think of it that way, it's like that curve that there's going to be outliers. There's going to be so many other every single individual person. So the Harmon curve is, you have to remember, is a averaged out curve preference based on, I think originally speakers, but they did throw in headphones, and they do headphones and everything else too in that. But even the headphones, when I still think isn't it still based on a flat response of a speaker room?
Well, right. So I'm not as up on the latest literature for Harmon, but I do want to mention that I think this is what Oratory and I think Oratory was talking about this in the last podcast we did with him. But where if you dig into the literature, you can see which what may have led to the different conclusions. So you can see the methodology a little bit there, and that does make a difference, because there's probably reasons why the 2018 target has the crazy bass shelf that it has, which in my mind is just totally not appropriate. But just to back up a little bit about what you said there about like trying to make sure something measures like or sounds like flat measuring speakers in a room. The answer to that would be yes. I mean, I think for anybody who's tuning headphones to a target curve, they want it to sound like flat measuring speakers in a room. But the problem with that is that a flat measuring speaker in a room doesn't measure flat at the eardrum.
Yeah.
So then the question is like, okay, which factors do you include and which do you not include? Do you include the room? Well, for headphones, you don't have the room, it's on your head, right? Do you include the torso, the neck, the side of the head, right? There's certain things that you can include, certain things you don't have to with headphones. So your overall, that's one of the reasons why this stuff is so interesting, I think.
And this is why I like to also keep saying, like, like measurements are only one part of it. You can't take that as the end all be all. Like there's so many factors into it, let alone the fact that a person has a unique
HRTF, yeah,
and like the way that their anatomy is, the way that maybe some of their ear canals are shaped slightly different. There's they're narrower or wider. Like there's so many factors, like just that, let alone like the psychology of it. Like there's even those pieces to it. There's
I just see Metal 571 in the chat. I think we talked about this as well at one point where we, as you say, we have all these different like our anatomy is completely different for our ears, and that does change the way it would the frequency response and what gets amplified. But in theory, there should be so much more agreement, because we've been living our whole lives normalizing the different gain factors that our ears have, right? So our brains are already used to doing this kind of normalization. So I think while there's probably some things in there that do skew this and do cause variation, I still think that there's probably, like, I probably hear 650 very similar to the way that Chrono does. So
I tend to think that most people do
added food. One sec.
Sure, yeah.
I do tend to think that people hear things similarly,
yeah, but not perfectly.
The same. Like,
yeah.
So I treat mostly the like the target curves and stuff like sort of like a baseline, and then you adjust it to your preferences to what sounds right. Because I like the Harmon target, but doesn't always sound natural to me. certain frequencies, right? So I do adjust that. I think that it serves more as a baseline, and that's where the average part comes in. So
yeah, the baseline is a good way to look at it. And then also, like, I think especially in the treble for both of them, or like the 2013 and 2018, they're a little rolled off, but I think there's a reason for that. And I think it would probably involve, delving into the methodology a little bit. But I always just think of the Harmon Target as a bit safe, And then you listen to something that's, like, for example, you listen to the Headphone Arya, or you listen to an HD800 or HD800S. That's got a bit more HD800S is more like 6K, emphasis there. But, in general, they're a little bit more counterclockwise tilted, a little bit brighter leaning. You listen to those, and if you listen to stuff that's certain recordings, they'll sound shrill, or they'll sound, maybe not so much on the Arya, but like on the HD800S, there's certain recordings that just sound shrill and biting and harsh. And so you just have to imagine that if that were one of the headphones that was tested in this in consumer preference testing, there's every reason why a person would want to prefer something warmer than that for many recordings, right? So
there's also
it's the circle of confusion, right?
Yeah, and like I even look at there was a stat study that I think Pepsi did, or somebody did it, where it's like the blind taste test of like what's better, Pepsi or Coke, and then like they cheated it a little bit because they knew that short tests of like drinking the Pepsi won because people like small doses of sweet, but when it was over a longer period of like a longer test, like so if you did an actual full can of it versus people chose Coke over Pepsi. Like that was done in the 70s, I think, too. And it was like, so it's funny, like there's those aspects too. Like what's like how much of it was like a short session of listening versus a longer, medium, like, and how did that factor? I don't know. I didn't read all the papers. Some of them were locked behind a paywall, and I didn't really feel like paying.
Someone in one of the recent live streams that we did, someone brought up the consumer preference testing for that. It wasn't done by Malcolm Gladwell, but Malcolm Gladwell was explaining why this was interesting. But there was consumer testing done on, like, I think it was like different types of tomato sauce or something like that, or spaghetti sauce. And the problem that they ran into was that while they ended up getting certain results for in their focus group testing, that's what it was. While they ended up getting certain results, it didn't end up being useful. But it's because they're asking the wrong question. They're asking what's the singular best flavor, and the problem was that they weren't using cluster analysis correctly, and they weren't seeing what preferences emerged from the data. They were just trying to point everything in one direction, and what really they should have been doing is recognizing that there isn't one perfect flavor for tomato sauce or one perfect blend. They should have been trying to use the data and then see what emerged as the dominant groups, and then you'd have multiple different choices. You'd have multiple different flavors that different people would prefer. And the interesting point about this was that most people they didn't realize what they actually preferred, right? So they didn't actually themselves know. And it was the same thing where, like, if you were to ask somebody, what type of coffee do you like to drink, most people will say bold, strong coffee, even though only a small percentage of people actually likes bold, strong coffee. It's just because there's this.
So do you know that's not true?
Fun fact, I used to work at the Starbucks. I got coffee master training, so I got to wear a black apron, and I learned a lot about different coffees.
There you go.
So
we'll have to have you on for the Zach Makes Coffee episode later.
Yeah, I like Sumatran coffee as well as from Malawi. Those are my two favorites. My two favorite growing regions for coffee.
It's funny.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I went to years ago. A couple years ago, I went to the Amazon rainforest, and we went. Well, yeah, this was one area where they're growing coffee, and I remember they're like, so this is like where we do all the coffee growing, and they're these like little green beans with red or little green before it's like roasted, right, before it's harvested even. Yeah, coffee, and you can eat those, and I mean it tastes horrible, but it makes and it's the texture is really weird. It's like it's biting into a piece of bark, but apparently it does still give you the caffeine. So if you're hanging out with unroasted beans, it is still effective. But it's crazy to think that like they would have seen this little green thing and been like, hey, let's what if we like roast this? I always wonder about that.
It's about like everything. Like when you think about like how did we get to cars? How did we get to glass? What I mean?
Right?
Like, the coffee one, I think is from the Middle East. So basically, there was this farmer dude. Apparently, his goats were coming back hyperactive.
Yeah, the goats.
And turns out it's because they were eating coffee cherries.
Yeah,
that makes perfect sense.
And then, as far as the roasting though, I think they just were chewing the coffee berries, right?
Yeah, for a while, and then they were like, and they basically wanted to make a tea out of it, and they became coffee.
They did the tea, that's right. And then it started as a tea, and then that's right. But even tea, think about that. Like, what made the? Well, I guess because the leaves dry up, and then they knew they could get the. That makes sense, actually.
That was probably even by accident. I can see that.
That's come to exist.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions in here that look pretty interesting. I wanted to.
Yeah, I should probably go back to the questions here.
Sorry, I totally
sidetracked it. I have one for Chrono actually, because we've been talking about this off and on a lot. But is timbre something that's available in frequency response, or can you and then further can you EQ timbre?
Yes and no. I feel like there's a material component to it.
Absolutely.
And construction, because I do feel like there's something when going from a dynamic to a planar, for example. But at the same time, there's things like, for example, the HD660S. I do not think that it's, out of the box at least, not quite as natural sounding as the 650 or 600. But then, you mess around with like 5K, 5.5K, there's something there. You tone it down, and then it comes a lot closer in timbre, quotations, to those other headphones. So I do think that there is a frequency response component there. Also, like for example, when you have an upper bass bleed into lower mids, right, it sounds a lot more congested. So and some people might say, the timbre's a little funky. And I think that's so it's both material and frequency response. I think at least that's been my experience so far.
So I completely agree, and I was going to say the same thing, because there's certain, so like while like if you had like of the same headphone type, driver type, you'd probably be able to find differences in timbre. But when you hear stuff like, for example, a balanced armature IEM, multi-balanced armature IEM, and you compare that to a planar magnetic IEM or a dynamic driver IEM, it's so vastly different. And the thing is, like, in most cases, you can't find a matching frequency response. So you can't really just evaluate the material component on its own. But the reason why I think we can conclude that there is a material component is because among all the varying different frequency responses for balanced armature IEMs, that is still a recognizable common quality to them. And the same thing I think is true for most planar magnetic headphones compared to dynamic driver headphones, especially in certain parts of the frequency response. Like for example, the bass response is planar bass response is recognizably planar. So like I tend to agree with that. I think while you can EQ the frequency response component, I don't know if you can really influence the material component as much.
I do feel like there's some normalization going on. I don't know. Is that a word? Was that correct? Yeah, I don't know. Because I go from like, for example, say I was listening again to the 660, and then I go to the Ananda, and it sounds a little funky in the mids. But then I listen to the Ananda for a while, I'm like, oh, this sounds right now. And then, I go back to the 660S, and then it doesn't sound quite as correct.
Okay, so this brings me to another question for both of you guys. So, and I've been talking to a number of people about this as well, and it has to do with prioritizing technicalities over frequency response or vice versa. And I think we're all kind of on the same page of like, well, we want it to sound good, right? Without EQ, we want it to just sound good regardless, right? Mm-hmm. And so much of that is probably in frequency response. But I tend to think that because of what you just mentioned, Chrono, with the normalization factor that occurs, with our our brains normalizing the frequency response that we get, because of that, as long as it's close to a good sounding frequency response, the technicalities matter so much more. And for that reason, I tend to think that the tolerances for what a good frequency response is should probably be a little bit wider than unless there's something like really weird going on with it, right? I think that in general, the tolerances for measurements should be a little bit wider than people give it credit for. Because what they're not realizing is that if they listen to something for even just 15 minutes, well, a week, but I was going to say 15 minutes, your brain is normalizing this as you're listening to it. And right. Once it is normalized more, then those other technical aspects like speed and detail and slam and whatever else, soundstage, those become the more salient factors in whether or not you're enjoying it.
Actually,
at least that's my take on that.
I experienced it pretty, not in the same way that you're in a way of the normalization piece of it anyway, especially when it comes to technicalities of a headphone. I don't like the Utopia, right? It's not that I don't dislike it. I appreciate what it does. I think it's a fantastic headphone, but for me personally, it's not my preference. But right. I spent 5 days with it, probably grand total of, let's just say 10 to 15 hours, right? Before all of a sudden it just all clicked, like where my brain burned in, all of a sudden was like, oh, and all of a sudden it made sense. And then the technicalities, like I got the slam, I got the speed of it, I was really picking up all those other pieces of it, and that's when it really was like, it really became fantastic to me. If that makes sense, like where it's it took me a little bit longer to really appreciate what it was doing rather than just instantly putting on it and understanding like it was, mostly because I thought that, to me, like, not that I don't dislike the Utopia. I think they're fantastic headphones. I just personally would rather have something else, if that makes sense. Hence the Stellia, for instance. But like the overall characteristic to me is that's what really kicked in, was that technicality piece is what won me over on the Utopia.
Yeah, the frequency response might not have been what you wanted it to be. Like the general tonal, balance wasn't maybe what you wanted. Maybe you wanted more bass presence or slightly warmer tilt or whatever. But the technicalities eventually are the thing that make you go, oh yeah, I love this. Like even for me with the Verite, like I prefer more upper mid range presence than the Verite generally has. Right? We know it has that sort of warm, subdued there, upper mids, and. But for me, I always like the Verite is one of my favorite headphones for its technical abilities, right? It's the no trade-offs headphone, right? It's got great detail, great speed, great soundstage, and great slam, and you have so many different pad options that you can choose whatever total balance you want, or as Anthony and I do, we do mess with EQ a little bit with it, right? So there's it's the technicalities of this stuff, like the all of those qualities that keep making this really interesting to me. Like keep making, and even something like the DMS Diana Phi, I hear the mids on that and I go, oh my god, like it's just insane for the detail, and that in spite of the fact that I'm not a fan of its frequency response, it makes it so that it stands out in such a cool way. But we should probably get back to the chat. Unless Chrono, sorry, I left you out with that one. Yeah.
Go.
I had something at the tip of my tongue, and then I forgot what I was going to say. Dang.
Technicalities.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think that's actually a lot more important, because I know that this is probably not something that Oratory would agree with. And I do think, I do appreciate the more science measurement part, right? I think it's very relevant. I just don't think that the technology for measuring that stuff and then applying it to our real life experiences is quite there yet.
We're also clashing sciences, right? Too. There's also that factor.
But I feel like there's something. Each headphone has its own experience. They can have a similar tonality, but they each have their own experience, and so I do think that's derived from their technical performance. So I do appreciate that generally more than their frequency response, especially view EQ, because you can get most things to be somewhat similar, right? So I do agree that I think that technical performance is a more sometimes important factor.
Right. But even if you don't EQ things, I mean as long as it's a reasonable
that goes back to that thing I mentioned where I see more like the Harmon to be more like a baseline, right? There should be some decent tolerances there for where things should be, as long as it follows the general sort of ratio between the different treble, bass, and sort of the overall shape of the curve. I feel like the brain will normalize and stuff.
Metal 571 correctly says the Harmon curve is an average. It is not an everything must match this curve kind of spec. For some reason, I only recently understood this, so never take it as an absolute truth kind of curve. Yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's an average thing, and anytime you get averages, you're going to have a ton of outliers to get you to that. There's going to be extremes on either end. You know what I mean? So that's the whole point of an average. So.
Oh, Gary Cole. Hey, man, I'm noticing you in the chat, and I'll get to your email. I just haven't had a chance to properly put my thoughts together yet. He says, if you do wine tasting, you must clear your palate before. It's just like that, yeah.
Yes, and so actually that Utopia, the reason why it took me so long, I think at that point in time, leading up to me getting the Utopia, I think I was listening to those for like.
Sorry, only what? I missed what
my Verite closed. I was listening to that for like, and so like, and that's a. It's a not completely different, but it's a pretty big deviation from what the Utopia's presentation is. So like to me, it just didn't sound right.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep saying it's boring, right? Like I always say, Utopia is kind of boring, and not in a bad way boring, but boring in the sense of like it does so well across the board that there's nothing that really not nothing. It doesn't have that like any unique features or factors to it, I guess would be more a way to put it, outside of itself being unique in itself, it being so good.
Right.
But like I think that's where I was having problems with it, is like, if I was listening to a set, and so usually that's why I give myself before I do a true like my own opinion of something, even for my own self, is I give myself at least a couple days worth, which usually equates out to about, I don't know, couple dozen, like a dozen plus hours worth of listening before I really will allow myself to really start to pick apart a headphone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For myself, not necessarily as a review.
But I mean, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, about like the question mark. At least there's a big question mark for me about, when engineers are developing headphones, are they, and regardless of whether or not they're following a target curve, I think actually a lot of them are not following a Harmon target curve. They're not trying to match a Harmon target curve, even get it close. Even Fang Bian from Hi-Fi Man, he knows the research and he follows the research. But I asked him, "Do you tune to the target curve?" And he says, "No, I tune to what sounds right." I tune it to what sounds right when I'm sitting in the middle of Carnegie Hall, in a good seat, or something like that, or listening to London Philharmonic or whatever. And it's worked out for him, I think, for the most part. But I also think that there's a lot of issues that happen when engineers don't follow the research, and when they don't follow the Harmon target. Because, for example, you get stuff like I'm just working on a review for the Andover PM50 behind me, and that's a perfect example of a headphone where there's a complete misunderstanding somewhere in there about how headphones should be tuned, because it's completely missing the pinna gain, the ear gain. Like there's no, and the goal was to make it measure flat, and they did make it measure kind of flat, raw, which is not a good idea, right? It's just it has that. To me, at least, it sounds like they missed that very important part about target curves and whatnot. So while they might think that it measures really well, it actually really doesn't. And I think that's just because there's a misunderstanding there between the engineer, or somewhere there's a misunderstanding with how things are supposed to sound, or even things are supposed to measure. Because I think that for in a lot of cases, I think a lot of the people who are more scientifically minded want to be able to anchor the the results of their whatever they've developed to something that's more than just their subjective preference. And sometimes it works when they're following a relatively closely some sort of target curve. But then other times it doesn't, when they misunderstand what that target curve means. But yeah, I'll stop rambling. We'll get to some more of these questions here. Obviously, we're talking about the Allegia.
Yeah, I was trying to. I'm listening to what you're saying, and the comments too. Like I'm trying to to multitask.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I agree though. I mean, it's just tough. it's a tough hobby, and that's what I was saying about the conflicting sciences to some level with this stuff too. Is like you have, not that they're conflicting, but they just haven't found a way to mesh it. Maybe is you have the measurement side, you have the psychology side, you have brain sciences, I guess, like fall into psychology.
Yeah.
And there's and then also the biological side of it too, right? Which some of the like the
it combines, yeah.
So how do you combine all those into an averaged curve?
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about this. The psychology side for one was very interesting, but I'd love to learn more about the Andrew Lissamore and I were talking about this a while ago, but the different effects on our like physiology, not just psychology, that good audio has. So, for example, the reason why if we're listening to really good audio, we feel good. Something feels good about it beyond just it sounds good. And I'm curious, like, if that's something that is worth. I mean, or if somebody's already maybe delving into this. Maybe you're measuring like heart rate or
brain waves and the heart rate. They have the
There's
some people that are doing it, but that's not as many as probably we would like.
Well, I'd love to see how that is for like when you're wearing high-end headphones or something like that, and like because to me there definitely is that component of like. Even if you're not like listening to music or anything, like if you're just like watching a movie or something like that, there's something about bad sound that makes you feel bad beyond just it sounding bad, and there's something about good sound.
A horror movie to like
yeah, exactly, yeah. So maybe it's a similar kind of thing to like the ASMR responses that maybe there's some sort of overlap there with what they're doing.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah. But let's dive back into the into the chat. We're talking about the X00 TR-X00 or THX00, which was in the past. Ebony Metal says heard one. He says surprised how much more detailed the treble was than X00. Oh, what headphone we're talking about here?
Teak maybe.
Oh, EMU Teak. Interesting. Because I don't want to talk down to the Ebony, but because I actually have one.
You better be careful.
And there's a lot of fans of it, but I know exactly what Metal's talking about here, because I found the treble. It's like you can hear that headphone's limitations in the treble. Like, yes, it's a fun sounding headphone. It's got good frequency response. Like, well, okay, it doesn't actually have a good frequency response relative to some targets, but it's a fun sounding headphone and it does certain things well. But I feel like you can really hear its limitations in the treble. But have you heard it?
I have the Purple Hearts. I don't have
Purple Hearts. Yeah.
And then I might try and snag Androids at some point, maybe if
Evan, yeah. But, well, he was saying that he listens to that more than anything else right now because it's it's the cooler, like, because it's summertime.
Yeah. Summertime. Yes, that can be a factor for sure. I'm trying to think. The Elysia's pretty good for too. But yeah, like with the Purple Hearts, I think just in general the THXs can be like. They have that V shape, right? So I mean, and then depending on the wood, it can go more bassy or more trebly, or maybe I think that the Ebonies, I think from my understanding of it, anyways, were the most balanced of the.
Yeah. I feel like I want to mod the TRX00 and see what I can do.
Android there's an open back mod that was out, and you can get.
I saw the pictures.
You can get. It's like $30 on Amazon to get all the parts to do it. It's ridiculous.
Well, see, I'm always nervous about that because it's like I don't know. I haven't ever done that, and I don't want to like waste anything or break anything.
I mean, I've modded my HD800s. I've done the.
Oh yeah, you did the SDR mod, right?
Yeah, and I've done some other things like that with other ones, and I've taken apart the Fostex that I have my Purple Hearts too. But
have you done any modding, Chrono?
Nope, I'm always too scared to do it. So if I want to change the sound, digital EQ. There we go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but see that's a good question. Digital EQ, why mod when you can digital EQ? There may be some reasons to, and it might be.
I feel like analog has a romantic component to it that people enjoy. Right. I think that it's weird because like as a guitarist, I don't like anything digital when I'm doing guitar, and I barely even like effects pedals. Right, so
do you use tube
I don't
amps?
like to. Yes, I use tube amps, and I'm pretty much only full analog. Guitar has to be just the chain of guitar into amp. That's it. Nothing else in between. But in headphones, I'm like, why would I? If I can do EQ.
But that's speaking to the difference between recording and playback, right?
So sorry. And here's something else someone else talks about. This came a couple times throughout the chat here. Kind of a slight deviation from this, but it's kind of the same topic when you think about it. Like, because EQ and hard modding a headphone is to really bring it in line with what your musical preferences, your sound signature. And so it keeps coming up is like the chase of the perfect headphone versus just enjoying your music, or doing this versus is enjoying your music kind of thing. So
right.
like, I think when you start doing, like, I mean, we've gone down a different rabbit hole, all three of us, just because of the fact that you're on this show and
Sure.
we interact. Like, so yeah, there's that factor where it's like, I do think that there's a piece like where some people do get lost, and actually some of the enjoyment for a lot of people isn't necessarily listening to the music, it's actually picking apart the hardware, right? So I think some people find joy in that. For me personally, like the headphone piece is an enjoyment thing for me. Like, so like I spend a lot of time at the end of the day where I'll sit down and I'll pop in either IEMs, depending on if I need to be quiet, or closebacks, or if I have whatever I have. And that's my end of the day, just kind of let everything go. I listen to music. That's, I'm not picking it apart. I'm just enjoying and kind of floating on that sea of music and kind of letting everything go for the day and go to bed. So I think you can have, there's ways to do both if you just have to know when to turn it off, I guess. But like, so what's your guys' thought?
That's a really important question, because I think, well, I mean, at the end of the day, you end up just like, it's like the old thing with that Batman movie, right? Like, you live long enough to see yourself, whatever that line is. But you go down the rabbit hole far enough to go back to Porta Pros and Yaxi pads, or HD6XX. But I tend to think so. Like, how there's a lot of people say, at the end of the day, this should all just be about listening to your music, and you should just be able to enjoy your music, and not stress or worry about listening to your gear and your headphones. There's totally merit to that, and I appreciate that. But one of the fun things about the hobby, I think, is listening to the equipment. I mean, obviously I'm biased because I do this. This is like my thing, right? But one of the things I just enjoy is the difference that you get from different equipment. And yes, it's all anchored to the way that my music sounds and that I care about music. But I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying different equipment. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I really love the way that this headphone or this chain makes this album sound. When ultimately, yes, it should be more about the music and about the album. But I don't think there's anything wrong with also appreciating, or even sometimes appreciating more, the equipment. Which is, I guess that's just me being a bit of a contrarian there with the to what most people say. It's all about the music. But I'll let Chrono answer this.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a fun topic. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some people who've read what I've written or the videos I made, excuse me, know that I'm a bit of a Beatles fanatic, right? So I listen to Abbey Road maybe, I don't know, 10 times a day. But five of those times I do it on the LC-GX because I like the way it presents, and the other times I do it with the Ananda because it has a different presentation and I enjoy it on both. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So and that's what there's no wrong way to do it, right? So like, Chrono, you actually kind of embody. Like, it's actually kind of funny because, like, when you think about it, like, I would say I'm more of the romantic side of the house, and then I'm more of the I don't know, what would you consider it? Like, what would be the curve here, Andrew, or Resolve? Like you're more like you're just saying, like, the technical, like really digging into the gear, and then I think Chrono kind of splits the difference for us a little bit. But like I think that there's no wrong way to do it, and you can enjoy your music and still chase gear. Because I have a lot of really nice gear, and I enjoy that part of it too. Like, I really enjoy, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't think that there's a wrong way to enjoy your gear. It's up to the individual, right? Like, to really, like, if you like.
Well, yeah, I just want to push back on that a little bit. I don't want to say that I'm enjoying it more than I am the music, because it's like what somebody else was saying. I saw it in the chat earlier, but it was the question about are we headphone enthusiasts or are we music enthusiasts? And I think we're music enthusiasts. I think that's really, at the end of the day, that's the more important thing. Yeah. Yeah.
No, but you're a musician, right? Too.
Bad one.
but I mean, it's like we've all in ways had experiences with music, so I think there's that too. Like, so you are correct. Like, I think that there's no, I don't think there's. I think the people that pursue like measurements or they pursue whatever, at the end of the day, there's still, it's just another aspect of listening to the music at the end of the day. If that makes sense.
The
Right?
four measure baiters of the apocalypse are.
Yeah, I love that one. I was almost going to retweet it and tag it. They got you good.
Oh, you should have. Oh,
That
so good.
not me, by the way. Just
I didn't. This is the thing that I don't know if it makes sense, but for me, it's like each headphone has its own sort of overall experience presentation. They have the different dynamics, soundstage imaging, this and that. You know,
Yeah.
And then there's the tonality, which I don't actually. It's not because AQ is not that big a deal for me, but also it's just I enjoy the different flavor. As long as it's a good flavor, you know, like for me, it's like, you know, there's the GX and Nanda, different flavors, both very good ones. I enjoy them both equally, and there's that kind of thing to it, right? So there's just that I think it's a somewhat almost intangible thing because I don't think it's something that measurements would show.
Right. I think there's that, right? Like, so there's that's the same with me. Like, I love the experience of the new of a new headphone or a new thing. I think what is it presenting to me? What's the experience it's giving me in that scenario or that time and space, right? So there's that part of it that I enjoy too. Like that's something else I enjoy about the gear side of the music is how is it presenting the music I like differently than what my current gear is or what my other, you know what I mean? Like, what is it giving me outside of what I currently have? Like, and there's that fun pastime part of
it. So I'm just putting the four measure baiters of the apocalypse meme up on the screen here. So if anybody hasn't seen this is amazing. I love. Okay, whoever put this together, you're a genius.
It's pretty good.
But what were we on? You're enjoying your equipment wrong. I love that idea. But I mean, that is one of the fun things about this is that, like, even if so like I think when I first got into this stuff, I think now to myself, like, man, what was I doing? Right? Like, what? I like that headphone. What? And now, you know, it's totally different. But the notion of enjoying your equipment wrong is a little bit hilarious.
Yeah, that's.
Well, I think that one of the problems, and I think that this is more having to do with the headphone general, just the headphone community everywhere, regardless of what form, is that people seem to prefer. They post a comment, right? They don't want a discussion. They're not really interested in your opinion. What they want is an argument, and that, I feel like that's the problem, and it just gets very toxic. And I don't think that there's a wrong way to enjoy gear, right? And yeah, I don't know.
I agree. Like, I think that there's each individual has their own way of enjoying their gear. So it doesn't. At the end of the day, it's up to you as an individual to enjoy your gear and not rely on others to tell you what you should enjoy.
I on that subject, somebody actually in the chat asks a good question here. Not actually, but somebody asked a good question here. Or says, I've always primarily been a metalhead, but the Arya has me listening to a lot more styles of music. And that's one area where I can completely, it resonates with me a lot because I do find that, like, differences in equipment, differences in gear have influenced and shaped my music preferences. Not necessarily to the degree that, you know, that would say, like, I wouldn't have gotten there otherwise. But as an example, I also now listen to stuff that I think is better now that I'm better representing it with higher quality equipment. I'm able to enjoy it more. Whereas before, if it was not, you know, if I was listening to it on, you know, my terrible car stereo speakers, I wouldn't have enjoyed it anywhere near as much, just because it doesn't sound as good. It doesn't. You don't hear all the different nuances that are going on in the mix, for example. And so I don't know, with you guys, have you found your music preferences change at all as a result of, you know, different equipment or better equipment?
I have always been pretty eclectic with all my music. Like, I've never, like, I grew up, my dad listened to everything. Same with my sister. So I've always had a smorgasbord of music. So I've always been pretty ADHD with my music likes. My takeaway is, if I like a track, I might not necessarily like the artist, but if I like a track or like a song, I don't really care what genre or the artist is. Like, it's that song sounds good to me, then I like it. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? So that to me is more the case. I will say that as I get older and that kind of stuff, my overall like skew of genres has changed. I tend to nowadays listen to relaxed type music rather than when I was a kid listening to like punk rock, rap, and hip hop and underground hip hop and punk music and stuff like that. But now I'm more mellow, chill stuff just because I don't got time for angst.
I listen to more serious audiophile music now than I used to about 2 months ago, if I'm being honest. So,
see? Serious audiophile music. Somewhere out there, Metal 571 is dying a little bit. But yeah, I think I'm the same way. Like, for the longest time, I was more into more intense stuff. And maybe it's also just a function of getting older as well. It's just, your preferences tend to shift a little bit.
Priorities, yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. For me, it's mainly still, I think I've shifted more from like pop, hip hop, and rock to more just rock and jazz recently.
Yeah.
So
getting into jazz, man. That's Endgame isn't actually with headphones. It's jazz.
It's the music, it's the jazz. Yeah.
It's funny because my stepmom was in a ton of jazz. I never really liked. I mean, I always liked jazz. That was really cool, stuff like that. But I never really had a lot of jazz in my collections. I think it's like kind of like that whole like you always kind of deviate from what you grew up a little bit, and but now I am finding myself kind of slowly skewing back towards jazz a little bit more recently in that. So it's funny.
But I mean, even with that, there's I do still find myself being bothered by certain types of jazz because of, like, so for example, I don't like the way that certain trumpets are recorded or saxophones. Like there's certain tones that it's so grating and harsh sounding. It's just like, I don't, and like, I love jazz. It's my favorite genre, but there are some recordings where I just can't get into it because it's bothersome to listen to. Even on really nice, maybe even made worse as a result of more revealing equipment, right? So, I find that transition for me, like to be able to making, I always again like jazz, but to making jazz my main genre, if that's a thing, that really only started as a result of discovering well-recorded jazz, and then that started going, okay, now this is like a genre I can really get into, right? But yeah, we've been going for about almost an hour and a half now. Is there? Let's maybe pull a few more questions from the chat. Everybody in the chat, if you want to ask, if you guys have one final question you want to ask us, each of us, drop it down in the chat, and we'll try and get to it. Did you guys see anything else? Any other questions? I see a lot of discussion, which is great as well.
A lot of jazz talk now.
Yeah. See, someone says hi-fi man cans may be considered jazz, orchestral, and more instrumental in general. But see, that's an interesting thing on its own because the hi-fi man headphones, they don't have not all of them, but the like the Arya and the Ananda, they don't have as much of that punch and slam. It's more of a softer kind of refined presentation, which I also tend to agree is really nice for classical and jazz and that kind of stuff as well. So I can completely.
Yeah, I agree because I feel like the mid range is just a little quieter on hi-fi mans, and they have but I was surprised how much bass
around
the
2K.
Ananda has.
Yeah.
It's just so much bass on the Ananda. For me, it was actually too much bass.
Yeah. Oh, just by the way, I still think because of like my recommendations and like what I've said is a good sounding headphone. I think some people think that I like bright headphones because I like the Arya, right? Like I like the Arya and the Sundara and the Ananda, and people think that those are it like bright pushes me in bright, but like
you like hi-fi man headphones.
But see, I don't think hi-fi man headphones
we have
are.
The resident Focal,
yeah, right.
And hi-fi man shills here, all assembled in one live stream. For
exactly.
You all to enjoy.
But see, like it's not that I like the hi-fi man Arya could be less bright to me and I would still like it, or same thing. Like I actually think that the Sundara isn't bright because the one that I have, at least, that one measures, it's the closest to the Harmon Target I've ever seen. Like it's basically a perfect frequency response as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think it's not counterclockwise tilted, it's not north of the in the treble or anything like that. And then of course the ZMF headphones right, like there's right? It's definitely yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm like super into the like bassy stuff. Like I really don't like the Cascade. I don't like the default tuning of the LCD-X, for example. Well, the LCD-X isn't bassy; it's just it completely lacks the primary ear resonance. But like my biggest pet peeve with bass isn't bass level or bass energy, because I actually enjoy the Harmon shelf. My biggest problem with bassy headphones is that far too frequently the bass doesn't come down at the right spot. It stays elevated and bleeds into the mids, and I find that's the biggest problem.
Oh, you love the Aeon too.
Oh man.
So actually, that's actually a fun fact. Like, cause I have the Cascade, Campfire Cascades, and I really enjoy mine as pleasure headphone. But I think that they've changed a lot since I've had them. And then granted, I also have the big XL pads, so like they're these.
Don't they have filters as well? Like they have
I've never, yeah, they do,
okay.
But I've never messed with them. I kind of did initially, but then ultimately, like they're a pain in the butt. I hate filters in headphones, by the way. I think that's such a
like the AM filters with
or even just anything you have to like take a front off and throw a thing on there and like and then you have to kind of
that's the analog EQ.
But it does front damping or front like putting something in between the driver and your ear is probably not ideal.
It hinders you though.
Yeah. Exactly. And and it's I don't know. And then on top of the fact that the tiny little things you have to kind of slowly place in there, and then I'm lazy and I don't want to take my headphones apart every 3 seconds. But but I will say, like, I'd be interested to hear, like, I'm going to try next time I meet up with Android, I'm going to try my Cascades with the XL pads. And then he's heard my Cascades, like almost a year ago now, I think. And I think with the XL pads, plus I think, honestly, maybe it's just my brain burning in, but I think that the bass has been down. It's still there. It's still very present, but I don't think it's as bad. As elevated as it was when I first had them, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like even now when I switch to like from these or my Verite clothes.
I wonder if that's pads wearing in a bit too.
Could be. Yeah, because I have the XL. I don't have my Cascades here, but they're just magnets. I love it. Also, all headphones need to have magnets as their head.
Yeah.
So I actually have like the different ones here. These are the stock ones. Well, these are the stock ones.
Well, but the stock, what is that, suede?
No,
cloth?
It's like weird, crappy cloth that like grabs at everything. It's scratchy and rough.
But I bet, does that influence the bass? Does it reduce the bass?
Somewhat. And so these actually sound pretty good with the cloth ones. But then the XL pads are probably like about almost an inch. Like they're here to take it out. It's like about an inch bigger. I'd say almost just shy.
So it's not funneling the bass as directly into your ears.
Yeah,
could be.
That helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, could be.
Fun, random.
Although I don't know. It all depends on how the headphone, like the coupling and all that stuff. Like I'm not sure about those yet. But it does. There are some technical. There's some technicalities there that are enjoyable for sure.
I feel like when I was listening to it, if I take away what I am hearing in the bass region, right? If I ignore the bass to the best of my ability playing, I think that their mids and the treble are actually really good. It's just that the bass is so much more on a pedestal than the other
I think
sections that.
This is going to sound weird, but like I think with the default pads, I think the bass is even more hilarious on the Cascade than it is on the Audio Quest Night Owl. Like
it's there, man. Like
it's insane.
It's a canon. Yeah.
I put it on. I was like, "Oh my god, I can't! This is nuts." Maybe you do have to pair it with the right music. But yeah, Brandon says neutral bright. Andrew, no man. Like I like my. This is the thing. When I started this journey, like on getting like trying to, it's like the journey everybody starts on. But like the thing that I cared about the most was trying to find the headphone that was warm yet detailed. This is before I knew about ZMF. I was like, I want warm yet detailed because I loved that sort of warm and inviting quality, not super bassy, but again, warm in the sense of like not as treble focused, not as counterclockwise tilted. And because that to me was really interesting, because usually you get those headphones that are like, especially if you come from like a DT880 or some of those Bayers that
Chrono's favorites.
It's a little bit treble intense there, right? So like finding headphones that don't have that, that was my goal. And it led me down the rabbit hole into the Odyssey territory, into Audio Quest, into whatever else, and then eventually I realized that no, actually treble is fine as long as it's balanced, as long as it's not sharp or biting or anything like that. But I think that the issue generally for a lot of people is that that's the most challenging thing, I think, to get right. And when you hear it as biting and sharp and unpleasant, it's it's the worst. it's fatiguing. But I did see a question here that I wanted to answer. It was about the SHP 9500. Come on, where is it?
I only heard one briefly, so I can't really talk. I mean, I wasn't. Yeah.
It's here's a question to throw off people: are SHP 9500s shit, or are they really great for the value? How much are they these days? I saw them once for like $60, I think.
They're not buying.
I don't know.
$60 is probably okay.
I don't know if they're great value anymore. Like I would probably take the K360 one over it.
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, that's
that price.
Yeah. Well, that's the advantage. You get a close back then too, right? So
so it does have a couple different advantages.
Yeah, I think for $60 it's good value. Yeah. Even like under $100 it's good value, but I think its default was like 150, and that's like that's stretching it. Yeah.
I think that I mean, I think I'd rather get like an AKG or something, but
or Porta Pros with the Axie pads.
Porta Pros with the Axie pads. All true.
There you go.
Yeah, I've actually never heard Porta Pros. Actually, that's not true. I've heard them once for like.
I haven't heard them with the Axie pads.
Somebody in my high school just put them on my head, and I tried them out. I was like, oh, they sound pretty good, but I don't remember what they sound like.
See, okay. Sorry, I just see something in the chat. Jex says headphone is warm and detailed. No, it's not warm. Not to me, at least. Like I don't.
It has good low end. See, this is that factor, right? Like it's
it's detailed for sure. It's definitely detailed.
And it has slam.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it's warm either. I didn't.
No.
More of like it reminded me more of like the HD800. For me, warm and detailed is just something like the LCD2 post EQ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhat warm. I actually find the LCD2 to be slightly brighter than the LCD GX. Not quite as bright as the Ananda.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I don't even consider the Ananda as being bright, but it's because the treble's so smooth.
It's exactly. And that's my that's why I think like I give recommendations based on headphones that tend to measure a little bit brighter than not all the time, but like or they'll measure like they have a little bit more treble presence to them, and then there's this thought of he likes bright headphones, but it's like no, like I just like balanced treble. I want smooth. I don't want aggressive treble. So
I also think that there's a genre pairing element.
Oh, totally.
Slightly, because I would prefer the Ananda for like jazz, but the reason why I like Odysseys is because one, I like their planar characteristics, which I mean both the Hyphamans and Odyssey.
Yeah.
But actually, the Ananda is slightly snappier than the LCD2. But
I found the Ananda sharp.
You found it what? Sorry.
Sharp, an Ananda sharp.
Sharp?
Yeah, sharp. It has like a sharp timbre, I guess. Would that be
sharp
right?
timbre, but not to be confused with sharp, like a treble peak.
Treble, not treble peak.
Yeah.
I found it like, but because of the sharpness, it made me almost feel like it had a sharp treble peak, though. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, this. I think this is just something with like certain characteristics about planar magnetic headphones that we come across. Like, there's a kind of, well, I mean, you call it timbre, and I tend to agree that it's probably one of the things that's related to timbre, that makes it distinctly recognizable as a planar. But I think with that come a lot of other advantages like instrument separation, and that, to me, it's that plucked character I always talk about. But it's hard to really describe that, especially for people who haven't heard the planars before.
Plucked's pretty apt, I'd say, for that, like because it does have that it has that sharpness of a instead of a strum or like you're saying, it's that like twang of like a
yeah
I feel
exactly.
Like it's like the audio appears more instant, if that makes any sense.
And this is my notion of speed.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and it's funny talking to some manufacturers. They like, for example, I was talking to Freddie from Head, and I was asking him about that, and he's like, yeah, that's one of the things that we had in mind when we were developing the headphone, headed phone, was that to try and capture really really fast transients, or the really fast attacks and stuff like that, and And to me, that's it's such a difficult quality to pin down because, when we talk about like detail, like we know what detail is basically. Like we don't know what it is, but we can recognize it, right? We can say, okay, this headphone is more detailed than this headphone. Even though, I mean, I guess there is a bit of debate there as well as to what constitutes that. But it's a term that makes a certain amount of sense. Same with soundstage and imaging and even timbre. But speed is a tough one because it does correlate to, like it's involved in all different aspects, speed and like, so attack and decay, that kind of stuff.
Well, I feel like it does make sense to attach it to transients.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because we're talking about something that's has to do with immediacy, timing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like Brandon mentions decays too fast. Maybe that's affects the timbre.
Yeah, you get a faster decay. Yeah.
Well,
although
it's still something that I don't know if speed in that sense should still be something like, oh, if it's really fast then it's good. If it's somewhat slower, unless it's like terribly slow, then I think it shouldn't be a problem. And sometimes I find myself like something like the 600 series. I don't think that they have the fastest transients. I mean, they're a dynamic driver, but I really enjoy that presentation. It's the way it presents sound and introduces it. It's very smooth. And it sounds very natural.
One thing you've mentioned, Chrono, I really like this term. It's that you've described something as having tension to it, and I really like that because to me that is almost somewhat correlated there. But there's another important factor to consider as well, and it's the damping, because sometimes if something is over damped, it can sound like it has really quick decay, but it's more just blunted. And on the subject of planars having a faster decay, I don't know if that's always necessarily the case, because there are some. Because I almost feel like it's more emphasized on the attacks and the immediacy of the initial leading edge. That to me is planar speed, but to me a lot of that correlates to tension and tightness and that sort of sense of control. And then if you listen to a lot of like Odyssey headphones in the bass, anytime there's like a really busy passage with lots of bass stuff going on, it's so articulate and so precise, compared to, like, I haven't heard other headphones that do that as well. Not all Odyssey headphones, I should say, but like the LCD4, for example.
Well, I don't have the LCD4 as reference, but
but even the LCDX and the LCD2.
Comparing the LCD2 to the LCD GX, I get that feeling.
Yeah.
I feel like that the LCD2 has that kind of quality.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I don't know if that is necessarily speed, but I've been kind of correlating it with that. I've been correlating it with that sort of sense of control and tightness and articulation.
Yeah,
even though that's also,
I was gonna say articulation is what I associate it with, and I kind of tie it to detail, but for me, the Ananda is also very articulate in the bass.
But see, that's tricky because it does, as you're saying, it does all correlate to this idea and sense of image clarity, right? The overall transparency of the window that you're looking at the detail of the image through, right? And instrument separation and all of this, it all correlates to this idea of detail and image clarity. So, but this is a great question here from Brandon as well. Is where he says, does anyone think sometimes decay is too fast for planars, and this might affect the timbre? And so again, I don't think this is necessarily decay. That's a question that I think it's still open, because I don't think there's any measurements yet that are like definitively let us know that. For an example, the HD800 has some of the cleanest looking CSD, but because CSD doesn't mean what we think it means necessarily, or it's not conclusive yet. We don't know if that is actually the case. And to me, the HD800 doesn't really sound as fast as planars. It doesn't sound as tight and well controlled as planars, as some planars. So, and with the timbre comment, I also, again, this goes back to that question of material-based timbre and frequency response-based timbre, and I think what you're getting to would be closer to material-based timbre, because then we're dealing with a different transducer type, and in that case, I think maybe that's that extra sense of speed for certain planar magnetic headphones, whether it's the decay or not. Like it might be the immediacy of the initial leading edge. That might be what constitutes planar timbre, or contributes to that recognizably planar timbre that we were talking about. So it's a very good question. Did I lose you guys?
No. I'm just sitting here in thought because I was thinking. I was just thinking of like, oh, the transients, how they affect like the sound presentation. One thing, example I can give is like, I wouldn't want to listen to the Rolling Stones and the Ananda because it's just, I don't know. There's something about that. The snap doesn't go along well with poorly recorded and mastered music because it just starts sounding this. I don't know. There's something weird about it.
Ellenrick says, he says, I mean, excursion really. This is just in response to you guys. He says, yeah, the planar diaphragm is larger, but it can't do excursion like a dynamic can, and impact and slam can suffer. So I just wanted to point out that it's not always larger. The diaphragm's not always larger, but the main advantage is that it's an even plane diaphragm, not a because like if you think about a dynamic driver, oftentimes it's the outside that's where the largest surface area is that's producing the sound waves for the bass frequencies, which makes a certain amount of sense because those are the largest waves, right? So you got to be able to push a lot of air there. But yeah, I think in general he's right. Like that's often one of the reasons why the slam can suffer a little bit, because you're not getting that high excursion capability. But anyways, we've been going for about like an hour and 45 minutes.
40 minutes. Yeah.
So yeah, and it's a Sunday, so I don't want to keep everybody too long. So with that, I think we should probably end the stream. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I want to thank these two guys, Tyler and Chrono, for joining me on this long session of rambling and Q&A. We should have a podcast version of this one up pretty soon as well, so stay tuned for that. But we will see you guys in the next live stream, and stay tuned for future videos. Bye for now.
Cheers.